Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Pagan Happy Hour. Happy Friday, everyone. And this conversation today is going to be a doozy. I hope you brought a drink with you because we'll probably all need one. So today we are going to be talking about some recent events concerning pagan discrimination and if this might be indicative of a wider trend that we as members of the pagan community should be concerned about. So I have a few examples here that I'm going to be sharing with you, but if you are new to Pagan Happy Hour, welcome. How this works is I'm going to be looking at your comments and your questions in the chat as they are coming in so that this can really be a dialogue. So it's not just me sharing my thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts and ideas on this topic as well. And if you do enjoy these Pagan Happy Hour chats, there are two main ways you can support this show. The first is with super chats, as there's going to be a lot of comments and questions coming in. If you want to make sure I see and answer your question or comment, you can submit a super chat with the money sign button below. Though the best way to support the show and the content I create is to join me on Patreon, where you will gain access to our pagan Discord server so you can meet and chat with fellow pagans all week long. So now that we got that covered, how are you all doing this week? This week has been very chaotic for me. I'd love to hear where you are watching from and what you are drinking. And I can see your chats coming in now. I see we have people today from Florida, from India, from Germany, Ohio, California, Brazil. So we're really chiming in from all over. That's wonderful. It's so great to see how our pagan community has expanded so much over the years. So let's get cozy. Let's have a chat about a very difficult subject, I think, to talk about, which is pagan discrimination. So let me have a sip of my wine here, and then we are going to jump into it. Okay, so there was a recent incident that kind of brought my attention back to this issue of pagan discrimination. And that involves a lawsuit that I recently heard about that's been covered by several pagans. I've read about it on Pathos, and then also Ocean Keltoy did a video about it. And this is a lawsuit about a woman who was fired from Panera Bread, basically for being pagan. So she was fired from her job for her pagan faith. And I thought this was a really fascinating case, and I wanted to kind of share this with you. And then I think we'll also dive into some other incidents of recent pagan discrimination that I uncovered. And of course, I want this to be a conversation as well. So I'm going to want to hear your thoughts and ideas around this, and if this might indicate a wider trend that we need to be concerned about. So let me tell you a bit about this case. So this woman, she was recently fired from Panera. She submitted a lawsuit. Her name is Tammy. And I have the details of the case here that I thought I'd run through real quick if you are unfamiliar with this story. And if you're not American and you don't know what Panera Bread is, it's a very popular sandwich chain here in the States. So Tammy, the pagan in the story here, so she did not discuss her religion at work at all, as she viewed her faith as, strictly a private matter. And I kind of approach that philosophy as a pagan when I'm out in the world too. I don't tend to share my faith with others unless directly asked. And here, When Tammy was taking a break at her job, the assistant general manager said that she was Christian, and then she asked Tammy, "What religion are you?" At which point, Tammy says, "I'm pagan." And then the general manager made up a face, which we can all imagine what that face was like. It was probably like one of these, like, oh. And then the general manager said, "You're going to hell." And then another manager nearby who was standing there also nodded in agreement. So right away, this is pretty antagonistic, I would say. Now, Tammy didn't want to argue with her supervisor. So she just said, "Okay," and then walked away. And I've done that same thing plenty of times when I've experienced some kind of discrimination where someone says, "Hey, you're going to hell." I just usually be like, "Okay, whatever," and then leave the conversation. Because it's very hard to convince anyone if they have that strong an opinion there. But then it gets even worse, if you can imagine that. So a few days later, when Tammy asked about her work schedule, one of the managers said, "Your hours are being cut until you find God." Then her schedule was reduced to 3 days, and after that, the hours were repeatedly cut. Over the next few weeks, they subjected Tammy to a really hostile work environment, telling her that her religion is false, that she needs to believe in God, that her soul's going to be condemned to hell, and that they would pray for her soul. I'm sure many of us pagans, raise your hand if you've experienced this kind of talk at you before. Very intense and very rude, especially in a work environment, obviously. So then Tammy approached the district manager and told her that she was being harassed because of her faith. Then the district manager downplayed her complaint and said that the two managers were just kind of joking around. Then Tammy asked to be transferred to a different Panera location, and then she was denied that option, so she couldn't transfer. Then she asks for the phone number for the human resources department. Then the district manager says, "If you call HR about this, you'll be fired on the spot." So then Tammy does call Panera's HR department at the corporate office and leaves messages every day, but never got a call back from anyone in HR. Then eventually, the district manager pulled her aside and demanded that she resign, saying, "How are those phone calls going for you?" So obviously the district manager was pulling some strings to make sure that HR never filed a formal complaint. Eventually, she basically quits or was forced to resign, so she's kind of fired. And then I also heard that her husband, who also worked at Panera, was fired as well. So that's just the basic story there along with the lawsuit. I hope I didn't get anything too incorrect there. Let me check your comments here, but this is quite an interesting story. And I'm lucky that I, have been working from home as a self-employed person for quite a while. So I haven't had any serious discrimination incidents occur at a workplace, but I cannot imagine how stressed and alone I would feel if that happened to me. It's totally inappropriate, completely rude, and thank goodness she filed a lawsuit, because I would too. So that's the basics of that case that I wanted to share with you. And I believe the lawsuit is still ongoing. I'll update you if I find out what ends up happening there. But let me check your comments here, and then we're going to move on to a few other incidents that have recently occurred surrounding pagan discrimination. Let's see. I see Scott here in the comments says, they are saying out loud what many people are thinking about our communities. Sad, but true. I hope that's not true. It's really horrible to think that there are so many people with that much hate in their heart. Yeah, it's really tough. Yeah, a lot of you guys in the comments here seem to share, similar stories, it looks like. And especially, here in America, it's so upsetting because we take freedom of religion pretty seriously here. So as far as I know, a workplace, you're not allowed to discriminate based on religion. And just because we're pagan and might not be as large a community as some other faith communities, that doesn't mean people can discriminate against us. Yeah, I see another comment here. Erwin says, I just don't understand how people can be so hostile just because of another person's beliefs. Totally agree. There's, no reason to be hostile. We can all disagree respectfully. At least I think we can. And I try to whenever I do run into these incidents occasionally. I see Val has a good comment here saying, my manager was threatening me with firing, but I reminded him of my religious freedom. Then I called his supervisor in human resources. They came and talked to him. So looks like you at least had a good HR department. So I see a comment here from Draven. It's only freedom of religion for Abrahamic religions. You'll get gossiped about behind your back if you're anything but in a great swath of the country. Yeah, there are a lot of closed-minded people out there that will gossip behind your back, I'm sure, as they have for me and many of you guys too. It's kind of just something we have to deal with as pagans, as a small community. But there's a lot of, silver linings here. I did a pagan happy hour maybe like a month ago. And it was about the future of paganism. And I read out some stats about how paganism is really growing, both here in America and Europe and even abroad in other countries as well, and continents. And at the same time, Christianity has been decreasing, at least here in America and Western Europe, with most people just kind of becoming agnostic or atheist, but some people, leaving Christianity and becoming pagan. However, if you're looking at it as a numbers game, even though Christianity is decreasing pretty rapidly here in America as well as in Europe, it's still increasing in terms of conversion and birth rate in other countries, or in other continents, especially in Africa and Asia. So worldwide, Christianity is still booming, even though it's decreasing here in America. So something to consider. I definitely recommend checking out that happy hour I did about the future of paganism if you want to see all the stats on what religions are expanding, over the next couple decades. So let me just check your comments here, and we're going to move on to a few other interesting stats that I found. I see a great comment here from Graves that pagans are able to be more open than even 20 years ago, and they see us as a threat because we don't kowtow to them. Yeah, paganism has been growing pretty rapidly, and things are quite a bit different now than 20 years ago. Definitely agree there. I see we have a super chat from Tay Thank you very much. That states freedom of religion doesn't apply to private corporations. just like they do censorship that goes against freedom of speech. You know, that might be true there. I'm not sure on the legalities of how freedom of religion works in private companies. I know that, what was it? Hobby Lobby, which is a craft store here in America, got in a lot of hot water, I think a year ago or so, because they were firing people who had an abortion or something like that. I can't quite remember the full details. So you might be right there that even though we do have freedom of religion here in America generally, it might not be as protected within a corporate environment. But at least in Tammy's case in Panera, she wasn't stating anything about her religion. I don't even know if she was even wearing any symbols. She was just asked directly and answered honestly. So it's kind of a tough situation there. Let's see. I see another comment here from, let's see, Eric, that says some parts of Europe, like Northern Europe, is more atheistic. I remember going to Estonia, which is one of the only countries to teach about things like Northern Crusades, and they dislike Christianity. I was lucky enough to visit Tallinn, Estonia a couple years ago, and I saw they have this beautiful Onion Dome Orthodox church that I visited there, but I also learned that Estonia is one of the most atheist countries in the world, which is really fascinating. And then I also lived in Prague in the Czech Republic for a year. And while I was there, I also learned that the Czech Republic is very atheist as well. So this trend seems to be occurring even quicker in Europe. Obviously, in America's, so much of our geopolitics is wrapped up in us being like this shining city on a hill, this place of religion and this place of religious freedom, that it's going to take a while for us to catch up to Europe, at least in terms of Christianity's declining influence. But it's still on that trend. So it'll be interesting to see 10, 20, 30 years from now if this trend is increasing or decreasing. Who knows? I see a comment here from Bjorn that says, the amount of people I see being very bigoted towards pagans in general is astounding. I can't seem to have a discussion with someone without them attacking my beliefs. Yeah, you know, it is really hard. And while I do have this YouTube channel and I chat with you guys every week, and I do put myself out there, in the real world, I'm a bit more isolated, I feel, and I don't necessarily talk about my religion unless directly asked about it, in which case I'll tell the truth. But it is hard to do so. And I know just from having a YouTube channel as a pagan out in the world, the amount of hatred directed at not just me, but all pagan YouTubers is quite astounding. You know, every day I get 10 to 15 hate comments that come in, usually from Christians. And, you know, I'm used to it by now. I just ignore it. It doesn't really tend to affect me. But I do find it surprising that there is this kind of army of Christians that go from, you know, pagan video to pagan video or pagan blog post to pagan blog post, and they all just trash it as much as possible or put up Bible quotes or say you're going to hell. That is somehow something they enjoy doing. I mean, it must be, considering the amount of comments we all get daily. But it brings me to another interesting recent discrimination story. So, you know, a lot of people have been talking about experiencing being like shadow banned, for example, on this platform here on YouTube, as well as, you know, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Now, specifically on TikTok, there's been certain incidents where people will mass report TikTok pagans and witches, which will then lead to their accounts being shadow banned. So how this works is the Christians will go on TikTok and they'll find a witchy TikTok video. Then they'll say something like, she's a witch, and then they'll tag all their friends. And then all their friends will also go to that same video and report it and flag it as inappropriate content. So when that kind of mass reporting occurs on TikTok, eventually that pagan or that witch's account gets kind of shadow banned, where people aren't going to discover that account as easily. And that same thing is occurring in a certain extent even here on YouTube. Now, I haven't heard too much about pagans getting this kind of mass reporting from Christians, but I do think it is starting to happen, that this is starting to be a technique that certain Christian groups are employing to take down pagans and witches online. I've actually been a bit curious about it with my channel as well, just because my analytics have been shifting downward considerably lately, and I'm not quite sure why, because I haven't personally changed anything. So I'm like, oh my goodness, am even I being affected by this mass reporting? Because I do get a lot of hate comments from Christians. So I think it's something that we're going to have to deal with as a community, and it's just starting now, that it might in fact get worse. So I don't have an answer as to, why there is so much hate towards pagans. I mean, that's something that's kind of, always existed to a certain extent, but the shadow banning of pagans and witches on TikTok, that's something new, and it's most likely going to start occurring even more here on YouTube, as well as on Facebook and Twitter and the other platforms. So just to be cautious of that, you can always click on the notification button either on my channel or any of your favorite pagan YouTubers channels, and hopefully that'll avoid their channel getting shadow banned too much, where you can still see their content. But I do think that that's something we're going to have to start dealing with. And that's one of the tough things when you don't own your own content like this, when you are providing it on a third-party platform like YouTube, for example. So that's another kind of incident that's been occurring, where there's these kind of groups of people that mass report certain videos. So pay attention to that and see if that ends up kind of happening more often in the near future. I see we have a super chat here from Rally that says, great topic. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're enjoying this topic. This is a bit of a more controversial one, especially compared to last week when we talked all about runes. So I do hope you're enjoying this chat. And I think it's a chat that we need to have. We got to be strong here. We have to be respectful, but still maintain our dignity here and our strength as a community. So another thing I wanted to share with you are some interesting stats that were released from the Scottish Pagan Federation that did a recent discrimination survey. And I do have a link for all the details on that pagan discrimination survey down in my description if you want to check it out. I found this out on The Wild Hunt, which is a great pagan news website you can check out if you're interested. So this survey asked a bunch of pagans questions concerning discrimination and what they have personally experienced. And here's some stats. I'd love to hear in the comments if these stats are higher or lower than you might guess. But it says 41% of respondents stated that they had been directly discriminated against because they are pagan. And 63% of respondents know friends within the pagan community who have suffered direct discrimination. Now, I don't know how they exactly define direct discrimination. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily consider the YouTube hate comments as direct discrimination. But I did find that interesting. So that's about half of us have experienced direct discrimination. And then another stat here, 40% of respondents have felt anxious or depressed because of other people's attitudes towards their pagan faith, with 50% of survey respondents reported being made to feel ashamed of their faith. And I think that's something I've definitely experienced, where other people have made me feel shame sometimes, which is totally ridiculous when you think about it. I think there's this perception still that people who are pagans are a little crazy or weird or eccentric, and that they are somehow less serious, when it couldn't be more from the truth, right? At least, you know, you guys and me, us as pagans, we're like digging into the history. We are fascinated by these ancient civilizations and how we can understand their philosophical approaches towards society, towards nature, towards humanity as a whole. This is serious academic work that we're doing. It is not silly. And it certainly shouldn't be something to be ashamed of. And I think for me personally, let me know if you've ever experienced this. Sometimes I still do feel shame in a way when I tell people I'm pagan, and I don't know why, because I know there's nothing shameful about it. It's just that kind of perception has been drilled into our brains, and we've been brainwashed a little bit, and we kind of have to just let it go. And I'm still working on that personally. So I see some of you guys are also talking about being in the broom closet. I see a comment or a super chat here from Barbie. Thank you so much. Who states, "No one can make you feel bad about yourself. Only you have that power." Thank you so much. That is 100% true. And it is a lesson that I am learning every year. Let's see. I see another comment here from Tay that says, "Roman pagans discriminated against non-Roman pagans and witches before Christianity." That's true. You know, no religion is immune towards both facing discrimination and being the perpetrators of discrimination. And I know, at least even here in our own pagan community, we often like to hate on each other too, and that's not necessarily very healthy. I mean, we're right now, especially, we're getting a lot of hate from the outside world. So one of the things, at least I try to do, is create a community that is respectful towards others. Even though we all have different beliefs to a certain extent, I think it is still important to come together to stay strong. Let's see. I see another super chat here from Elmira Luna, thank you very much, that states, "I try to be very nice to everyone I meet because I realize I may be the only out witch/pagan this person ever meets. It's a bit stressful." Oh my goodness, I totally relate to that. When I tell people in real life that I'm pagan, usually they're surprised. And then I feel all this pressure, like when they ask me about my faith, that like, oh, I better put my best foot forward because I don't want to screw up here. I want to make sure that I'm eloquent in the way that I'm describing my faith, and that I'm not being antagonistic, but instead being welcoming. So yeah, you know, it's a tough one. I do feel a lot of responsibility on my shoulders, as I'm sure all of you do, because there aren't that many of us. So when someone meets us, we are kind of the pagan representative in a way, and we do, at least should try to put our best foot forward there. Let's see. Great comments. You guys are really bringing them today. This has been such a fun conversation so far. Let's see. A few other stats from the Scottish Pagan Federation survey. Then we'll move on to a couple other recent news stories. So another stat here, 60 to 70% reported being the targets of evangelization. Can you guys relate to this? I definitely can. It seems like everywhere I go, someone is trying to convert me. And it's so silly. Like, if they think their YouTube comment is going to convert me to Christianity, it's so odd. But also in real life too, where that whole, I'll pray for you, or Jesus loves you, those types of comments I just find so ridiculous, honestly. I don't think they're going to be successful in converting me, or really most of us pagans. We already know what other religions offer, and we made the choice to become pagan because we wanted something different. And that's one of the great things, in my view, about paganism is we do not evangelize. We do not proselytize. Anyone who is pagan kind of learned about it in their own way and then decided themselves to join this community, to join this faith. We do not put pressure on anyone to be part of this community, to be part of this religion. And I think that's so wonderful. It's one of my favorite things about paganism. Sure, we may be a bit smaller as a community because we don't evangelize or indoctrinate, but at least we're assured that anyone who comes to this community, anyone who comes to this faith, came so of their own volition, of their own interest, that they weren't pressured into it. And I think that's such a beautiful thing about paganism, and it makes me so proud and honored to call myself a pagan. Let's see. And the last stat here from this discrimination survey, let's see, 90% of respondents reported being perceived as less serious than other faiths and religions. Do you guys relate to that, where when you talk about paganism, you're worried people view your religion as less serious, even though it's much older, And I always find that so strange because, especially considering, at least here in America, so much of our cultural identity is built on Greco-Roman history, philosophy, and art, that, obviously when you look around, you go to Washington, D.C., and you look at the, the architecture of the buildings, right? It's all classical architecture. America was so vastly inspired by Rome and Greece, in both positives and negatives, don't get me wrong. But to think then that these cultures are somehow less serious, or that the philosophers or the great thinkers or the religious leaders of these cultures were somehow less serious than, religious leaders in other religions, seems so silly to me. And that's just talking about Greece and Rome. I mean, there are so many different pagan cultures from around the world, because, when you look at the grand timeline of human history, paganism has existed in kind of some form or another in almost every culture and country. Pretty much religion all started with animism for the most part, and then sometimes graduated into some forms of paganism. But even I consider animism as a foundation to paganism. So when we're talking about our history as humans, we are talking about people who are pagan and were pagan for eons. When you look at the earliest human civilizations. So of course you could look at ancient Sumeria, or if you want to go even further back, you can go to Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia. So, these are all societies that were pagan. So paganism birthed civilization. And to think that that is somehow silly or not serious is quite ignorant, in my opinion. Let's see. Just checking your comments here after I went on that little bit of a rant. I see a comment here from Twilight Kim that states, I relate so much to being perceived as silly. My dad always made fun of my aunt for being Wiccan, not realizing I was one as well. Yes, that's tough. And I see another comment here from Light of Belenis stating, yes, I love being told that my religion is Dungeons and Dragons. Oh my goodness. Yes, I do hope that changes. And I think one of the great things about pagan creators here online, but also pagan authors, and not just here on YouTube, but across the internet, the more of us that put this information out there, the more of us that are sharing our thoughts and our ideas and our beliefs, hopefully the more people will realize this is not silly, this is not Dungeons and Dragons, this is deep and meaningful, and it's something beautiful and something that should be honored, not ridiculed. Let's see. I see an interesting comment here that people unfortunately seem to associate paganism with D&D, so Dungeons and Dragons, or the aesthetic witch talk. So it's taken far less seriously than it should. I think paganism suffers from something that most religions suffer from, which is often the extremes of the religion get the most popularity, because here in this 21st century culture where our attention spans are like a goldfish, we latch onto the most extremes or visually intense versions of things. So naturally, something like aesthetic witchcraft would pique our interests probably more, because in part, we've all suffered a lot in terms of our attention spans. I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but it's the same everywhere. It's not just paganism. I think it's similar to in Christianity. You can think of the growing popularity of these mega churches. It's all about the spectacle now. So whoever can master the spectacle will, of course, gain the popularity and the profitability. But don't forget, there are plenty of serious people out there who are doing the research. And, I'm not necessarily the best spokesperson for that because I don't have a PhD. I haven't written a book yet. So make sure you follow the people that do have PhDs and have written books as well. So another few things I wanted to say about this potentially increasing trend towards pagan discrimination. It's also affecting pagan businesses to a certain extent. So I know that some witches have been kicked off of Square, which is a payment processing software for selling occult items. And it does make me a bit nervous if certain website hosting platforms like Squarespace or WordPress might follow suit with this. So it might end up in a few years' time be very difficult for online tarot readers, for example, to make a living if they have their websites hosted on these popular platforms. So I am a bit worried about that. I also believe in 2012, eBay changed its policy and doesn't even allow certain occult items or like spells or metaphysical stuff on their website too. I'm not sure if it's changed since 2012. But I do think that as tech companies do become increasingly concerned about their perception towards the wider world, and they're feeling the weight of that responsibility, that they might start increasing and cracking down on certain fringe areas, and witchcraft, paganism, and occultism could definitely be one of them. So that's going to be something to watch over the next couple of years. So I am a bit concerned about that. There was also a recent incident that very much makes me think of the Satanic Panic. So there was a recent arson attack in New York where a house was destroyed that belonged to a prominent Satanist. Now, the arsonist was a Christian who wanted to kind of destroy all Satanists. And I do worry that this kind of Satanic Panic Part 2 is going to be a potential trend. So if you're unfamiliar, in the 80s, there was a big Satanic Panic. I definitely plan on doing another Witches of the Ages video focusing on the 1980s, because I do want to dive deep into the Satanic Panic and what that represented for the witch and pagan community. But basically, it was kind of similar to Pizzagate, but in the 80s. There was a lot of these lies. It was like a lot of people believing there was all this satanic, horrible stuff featuring children. I don't want to get into the details. And it turned out to basically all be a lie. And a lot of people's lives and reputations were destroyed in the process. Now, I do worry about this potentially coming back. Now, I know things have been calming down, which is good politically. I think we all kind of needed a break. But clearly, there are people who are concerned about Satanists right now. I don't want to get too much into that whole conspiracy realm, because also, like, I don't want my channel to get shadow banned, as we talked about earlier. But Satanism is getting kind of mixed up into this, where we know that like Church of Satan people obviously are not doing what these conspiracy theorists are saying they're doing. They're not involved in this. So I don't know who these Satanists they think, are doing this kind of crazy stuff. But I am worried about this concept of kind of like Christian patriots attacking Satanists or witches or even pagans, thinking that they're wrapped up in this fear, that they're doing something bad. So this obviously is not something that's fully taken off yet. I mean, this arson attack is definitely concerning, but I am a bit worried about, could this, vigilante justice against Satanists start to affect wider communities? Something to pay attention to. I mean, clearly they're using similar strategies from the 1980s, such as like false allegations, declarations of evil people, or presence of the Christian devil being at work. And these are all kind of comments I get on my YouTube channel. So obviously Satanists aren't necessarily pagan or would consider themselves pagan, but the communities are, at least from an outside perspective, they view them similar. So I do worry a bit about that. So yeah, just wanted to bring that up too. It is getting kind of serious. So we'll keep an eye on this whole Satanic Panic thing. See if it's starting up again. Let's see. Well, those were all the main kind of news stories that I wanted to share with you about these kind of recent events concerning pagan discrimination. But I also want to hear your thoughts. It could be, this kind of stuff just fizzles out, or this could be the start of a potentially wider trend where there are more kind of vigilantes or mass reporting groups that lead to shadow banning for pagans. We'll have to see what happens. I'd like to know, are you concerned about that? On the one hand, it's so interesting because I do feel that today I am so much more free. As a pagan, I'm less concerned, less worried about being ridiculed or being condemned than I was, 10, 15 years ago when I first started learning about paganism. So I do feel so much more open. But on the other hand, I am kind of worried about the concept of vigilantes and what that might mean as a pagan that is out on the internet. So Luckily, I have you guys, the pagan community, to help me through this, and I want to help you guys through this as well. Like I said, we got to stick together. So when these incidents do happen, when you do find out about something, concerning pagan discrimination where you live, let's share it and let's help each other, because that's our strength here. We are still, a fairly small community, comparatively speaking. And I think it's really important that we stick together. So, that was a lot. That was intense. I'm feeling like I'm sweating a little bit from that discussion. It's a tough chat. I really feel like it needs to happen, but it's a tough chat to have. So, we have a few minutes left of Pagan Happy Hour. So at this point, feel free to share any questions you might have, and I am here to answer any question you have about paganism. And while you're typing those in, I also wanted to mention, I saw Ocean on the chat earlier, so I'm actually going to be on his channel live on this Sunday at 8 p.m. Central. I have the link for his channel down below. So if you want to see me there and you'd like to support his channel, I highly recommend his channel. I have it linked in my description box, and we'll be chatting all about consumerism and materialism and social media and how these things have affected the pagan community. Let's see, we have a super chat here from Seth. Thank you very much, with a question. He asks, what's your advice for new pagans coming into this kind of environment? Gosh, great question. So, I think it's really important to reach out and find fellow pagans. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to start your own YouTube channel, though, please do if you're interested. That could be fun. But reaching out either in your local pagan community, finding a local New Age shop is usually a good way to meet fellow pagans, or online through Discord communities. I have one, but there are plenty other pagans that have Discord communities, or through, meetup groups, discussion boards, things like that. Because yeah, if you are new to paganism, you're going to be facing, as we've learned today, some hate. And it's always good to have a community to help you deal with that. Because there are so many wonderful people here in this community. And it's our responsibility as pagans that have been in the community for a while to help newbies out there. And then also, as new pagans, take your time. This doesn't have to be a race where all of a sudden, you jump into wearing a bunch of pagan symbols and putting yourself out there like that. You can take your time in terms of learning what branch of paganism speaks to you the most. There are obviously many different branches of paganism, and this might be something that evolves and changes as you grow. I started predominantly as Wiccan, and now I lean more towards Norse paganism and Celtic paganism. So it's okay to spend some time learning and growing and figuring out which community you feel fits your beliefs and your lifestyle best. So I hope that helps. But yeah, that was a great question. And I do have a video I made a few months ago, which is advice for coming out of the broom closet, which, if you're unfamiliar, is the term many witches and even some pagans use for telling people that they are now pagan. And some people, go all in and completely go out of the broom closet, and some people are kind of semi-in, semi-out. And that's actually what I'm in right now. So for the most part, obviously, I have this YouTube channel. My close friends and family know I'm pagan and that I have this YouTube channel, but my extended family doesn't know yet because they're very religious. And so I'm sure they'll find out eventually, and that'll be fun. But, we all get to choose what level we want to take it in terms of how far we want to be outside of the broom closet. But I recommend checking out that video because I go into some tips and tricks on how to have that discussion if you are ready to have that discussion with your friends and family. Let's see. Great comments. I'm just going to check here. I see an interesting comment from Forrest that says, Christianity is in panic mode due to dropping church signups. So I assume we will see a push from Christian leadership in the coming year. That's definitely interesting, and I do wonder if some of these recent events have been a bit of a defense mechanism or a last-ditch effort to seem relevant in American society. It's possible. You know, good point. Let's see. Royal has a question. What do you think about pre-Islamic paganism? So I assume you're meaning like Sumerian paganism or, you know, the pagan religion that existed in the city of Ur or Uruk, where like Gilgamesh was written. Super fascinating. I am still a newbie here on the earliest kind of Sumerian paganism, but I find it very fascinating, very interesting, and I want to learn more about it. So, you know, that's definitely on my list of things to learn about. Let's see. Let me check your comments here. Gigi has a great question. That is, what do you think about discrimination between different types of pagans? Example, initiated versus eclectic Wiccans, or Wiccans versus other pagans, or different pantheons? That's a great question. And, you know, we as pagans, or even in the witch community, we have definitely hated on each other from time to time, and that is not good. And I really try, at least in my channel, to keep things calm because I don't think it's very healthy when we hate and discriminate against each other, because, you know, we got to stick together. And I don't like all the gatekeeping that's been happening, especially recently with witchcraft and paganism. And I hope we can kind of find a way to respect our elders that are more educated in these fields, but not push away newbies that are just starting out and are really excited and want mentors. I feel like as people who might have been in the community for a while, it's our responsibility to help them through this transition, to help them learn and help them grow. So I hope the hate within the pagan community calms down soon. Let's see, we have another super chat here. Thank you so much, Tay Ray, with a question here. Should paganism be taken out of capitalism since it gets expressed in the wrong way, such as in fantasy games and stories? Whew, that is quite a doozy of a question. And it's probably something I'll be discussing with Ocean Keltoy on Sunday when we talk live about kind of this capitalistic approach towards paganism. Now, on the one hand, when you're thinking about like fantasy games and stories, and I think of something like Lord of the Rings or Dungeons and Dragons, on the one hand, those stories and tales contain ancient wisdom within them, especially as someone who really believes in the sacred power of the archetypes. When I think of something like Lord of the Rings, while there are a lot of obvious pagan influences, especially coming from ancient Finnish pagan stories and folklore, as well as Norse paganism, in a way, that book series and movie preserves those sacred archetypes and those stories and disseminates it to the wider populace. So that's awesome to a certain extent, but we want to make sure that people understand that while storytelling is a way that our beliefs can pass on through eons. At the same time, there's also the more serious side to the faith that is important. So a balance has to be struck. And then at the same time, when you think about paganism and the pagan community with capitalism, it gets very tricky. Now, I wish I was like just a housewife and didn't have to worry about income at all. Like, that would be awesome, and I could do everything I do for free. That would be great. But unfortunately, I'm not in that situation. So me, like many other pagans, we kind of have to figure out, how do we turn our life's passion? How do we turn our mission into something that both sustains us spiritually, something that helps others, but also something that ensures we don't become homeless? So that's why you'll see so many pagans doing projects that do have a capitalist bent. For example, I created my own tarot deck that I sell, and I use that as a way to help fund what I do for a living. I also have my Patreon, and without my Patreon, I wouldn't be able to provide free educational content about paganism on my YouTube channel. So it's hard to fully divorce capitalism from paganism because there's not a central authority giving us salaries, people who are full-time pagans, right? When you think about Christianity, they have the Catholic Church, for example, where people go into a priesthood and then they have their housing and needs provided for them. That doesn't exist in paganism. And there's a lot of reason for that. I think a lot of us are glad that there's not a centralized hierarchy. But at the same time, that means people who feel deep in their bones that this is the path they must follow and dedicate their lives to, they have to find some way to at least provide a modicum of stability in their life. So great question. A lot of nuance, a lot of complexity there. And I would love for paganism to be more divorced from capitalism. I do think it's gone too far in the capitalist direction, and I want to pull it back so that we remember why we all came here in the first place. It's not about likes and follows and dollar signs. It's about faith and belief and community and respect for nature. But you got to strike that balance if you're going to be doing this full time. So really tough question, great question. And I think we'll probably dig into that more on Sunday. Let's see. James has a comment here. If we can't have fun in paganism, then what's the point? So true. Us pagans, we like to have fun. And that's why I make a lot of content about the pagan holidays. I love holidays. I love celebrating. I love pagan happy hour. So yeah, we got to have fun with it too. It can't all be serious. Let's see. Oh, I see Leonard James did a super chat. Thank you so much for your support. I see a comment here from B that says, would love to see a physical place for all to worship, but nothing beats nature. Exactly. I think in the meantime, until we have designated temples for our pagan community, going out in nature is probably the best place to connect with your faith. Though I do really hope that, we can start building temples. And again, here we go, diving back into the capitalism thing. How are we going to build these temples? Who's going to run them? It's all very complex. Though I also, something I'm even more interested in because I'm a bit of a history buff, I am fascinated by sites that were historic pagan temples, obviously in Greece and Rome mostly, but elsewhere as well. And I would love for those sites to be places where the local pagan community could still go to worship. Obviously, a lot of these sites are now cultural heritage sites or are even museums, or in the case of Rome, they are now churches like the Pantheon. for example. But I would love to see these ancient, beautiful structures be locations that modern pagans could go to worship. I mean, how exciting would that be? So yeah, I definitely am very passionate about the concept of pagan temples, and I am waiting for some eccentric billionaire to contact me so I can help direct the construction of pagan temples around the world. So please contact me if you are a eccentric billionaire. Let's see. I see, a few of you guys talking about different types of pagan temples around the country, around the world, as well as the importance of sacred groves and sacred natural sites. For the Druids, for example, they predominantly worshipped in forests. So can we create areas of forest to be a sacred site and to be a place of worship? How exciting would that be? And let's see, Draven has a great comment. I think part of the growth we need is to recognize the sacred spaces we already have and create spaces there, even if it's a labyrinth overlooking a body of water or in the mists of the woods. Very poetic comment, I love that. Yes, there are sacred spaces all around us, and we just need to tap into them as much as we can. I know there's been a lot of issues lately with Stonehenge. If you're familiar, Stonehenge, they do usually open up for the solstices for the local pagans to go in and worship there. Though lately it's become more and more restrictive because it is a National English Heritage Site. So there's a lot of interesting political battles going on in terms of ancient pagan locations and their future. Something I definitely want to get more involved in as I grow older. So yeah, great comments there. So looks like I'm almost done with my wine, and it is now 6 here in Texas. So time to sign off for Pagan Happy Hour. I really want to thank you guys all for spending your Friday afternoon with me and for having this conversation. A difficult conversation, but one that I think needed to happen. And of course, if you are interested in joining an online pagan community, do please consider my Discord server. I have the link down below. It's connected to my Patreon. So you get immediate access to the Discord if you join our Patreon community. And also, if you're interested in more chats, this Sunday, join me on Ocean Keltoy's channel where I'll be live with him and we're going to have another great discussion. And I think next week I may do a video about Norse pagan magic. Still deciding on the topic. And then, of course, we'll be doing another Pagan Happy Hour on Friday as well. So I will see you all then, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Cheers. Bye.